It was supposed to be a routine flight, a simple journey with no surprises. But what happened at 30,000 feet left passengers stunned and a family shaken. Picture this. A little girl, no older than 5, sitting quietly in her seat. She's excited, like any child would be on an airplane, her eyes wide with wonder. Out of nowhere, an incident erupts, an action so shocking it silences the cabin. A flight attendant, visibly frustrated, reacts in a way no one could have expected, setting off a chain of events that would change everything. What she didn't realize, though, was who this child's mother was. What followed was a moment of truth that no one on that flight would ever forget. Stay tuned as we unpack this unbelievable story of accountability, resilience, and the power of standing up for what's right. As the flight continued, passengers whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The little girl, her innocent face now streaked with tears, clung to the armrest, visibly shaken. The flight attendant, stern and unyielding, returned to her duties as if nothing had occurred, avoiding eye contact with anyone. But something felt off. The woman seated a few rows back had been watching the entire scene unfold, her expression unreadable. She seemed calm, but there was a quiet intensity in her eyes that hinted at something brewing beneath the surface. No one realized at that moment who she was or how deeply connected she was to the little girl. Passengers began exchanging glances, some fidgeting uncomfortably, others pulling out their phones, unsure if they should record what might happen next. The air felt heavier now, thick with tension, as everyone wondered who would speak up first. The flight carried on, but the atmosphere had shifted. Passengers kept stealing glances at the little girl, her quiet sobs tugging at their hearts. The woman from a few rows back stood up, her movements deliberate yet calm, and made her way down the aisle. People watched her, curious but unsure of what she was about to do. Meanwhile, the flight attendant tried to maintain composure, but the unease in her body language betrayed her. A few passengers began murmuring, their voices just loud enough to carry. "Did you see what she did?" one asked. "What if that was my child?" said another. The woman reached the little girl's seat, crouching down and whispering something to her. The girl's tearful eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. The woman stood, turned to the flight attendant, and in a voice steady yet firm said, "We need to talk." The cabin grew silent. The flight attendant froze for a moment, her eyes darting to the passengers who were now openly staring. She hesitated, then straightened her uniform as if trying to regain control of the situation. "Ma'am, I don't believe this is the time or place," she said, her voice clipped. The woman didn't flinch. Her gaze stayed locked on the flight attendant, unwavering. "No," she replied calmly, yet with a tone that carried weight. "This is exactly the time and place." By now, whispers had turned into hushed conversations, tension rippling through the cabin like static. People were leaning into the aisle, craning their necks to see what would happen next. The little girl watched with wide eyes, clutching a small stuffed animal as if it were her lifeline. The woman took a step closer to the flight attendant, her voice low but firm. "Do you even realize what you've done?" she asked. The question hung in the air, and the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. The flight attendant's expression faltered for a split second, but she quickly masked it with an air of authority. "I was just doing my job," she said, her voice defensive. "If there was a misunderstanding, I apologize." But the words sounded rehearsed, lacking sincerity. The woman tilted her head slightly, her calm demeanor unshaken. "A misunderstanding," she repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. Her gaze dropped to the little girl, whose tears had slowed, but whose fear was still etched on her small face. "This isn't something you brush off with an apology." Just as the tension seemed unbearable, a voice came from further down the cabin. "She's right," a passenger said firmly. A man in his late 30s stood up, his voice carrying over the hum of the engines. "I saw what happened. This isn't okay." Another passenger chimed in, followed by another, their voices uniting in support. The flight attendant's composure began to crack, and her eyes darted toward the cockpit as if silently pleading for backup. But before anyone could respond, the woman spoke again, her voice cutting through the rising murmur of the passengers. "Let's get one thing clear," she said, her tone sharp and commanding attention. "You didn't just upset a child. You crossed a line. And now we're going to address it." Suddenly, the flight's intercom crackled to life, interrupting the moment. The captain's voice, calm but firm, announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your cooperation as we handle a situation on board. Please remain seated." The cabin fell silent once more, the tension now unbearable as everyone realized this wasn't over, not even close. The woman didn't sit down despite the captain's announcement. Her presence was commanding, and the passengers seemed to rally behind her. The flight attendant, now visibly flustered, took a step back as the woman spoke again. "You should know," she said slowly, her voice carrying through the cabin, "you didn't just hurt any child. You hurt my child." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. The little girl looked up at her mother, her small hands clutching tightly at her arm. The flight attendant's face turned pale as the weight of her actions seemed to hit her all at once. She stammered, trying to explain, but the words wouldn't come out. Before the situation could escalate further, the captain appeared from the cockpit, his face set in a serious expression. "We'll be landing shortly," he said, addressing both the passengers and the crew. Then, turning to the woman, he added, "I assure you, this will be handled appropriately once we're on the ground." The passengers clapped, their voices rising in agreement, but the woman wasn't done. She locked eyes with the flight attendant and said, "This isn't about landing or policies. It's about accountability. People like you shouldn't be in a position of power over others." As the plane began its descent, the atmosphere shifted again. The woman held her child close, her strength radiating through the cabin. Just when it seemed the situation had reached its peak, the final twist came. A passenger from first class stood and approached the scene. "I'm an attorney," he said, his voice steady. "I witnessed the entire thing, and I'll ensure this is followed up properly." The flight landed, the cabin doors opened, and as passengers began to disembark, the little girl and her mother walked tall, knowing this fight was far from over, but justice was on their side. As the passengers disembarked, many stopped to offer words of support to the woman and her daughter. The attorney stayed close, exchanging contact information with her and assuring her that justice would be pursued. The flight attendant was escorted away by airport personnel, her earlier confidence replaced by unease. Outside the terminal, the mother knelt down to her daughter's level. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, brushing a tear from the little girl's cheek. The child nodded, her small voice saying, "You stood up for me." The mother smiled, her heart heavy but proud. Word of the incident quickly spread, and many passengers shared their accounts online. The story sparked conversations about accountability and the importance of treating everyone with respect, no matter the situation. While the day had been difficult, the mother knew one thing for sure: she had shown her daughter the power of standing up for what's right.